Hello and welcome to BitTech. Today we have for you the MSI MPG CORELIQUID K360 CPU cooler. Now this cooler is packed full of fancy features and promises some powerful performance. We've got quite a lot to cover in today's review, so let's get stuck right in and see what it has to offer. First up, we have MSI's Torx 4.0 fans, designed specifically to provide a concentrated airflow through the radiator. MSI has split the 8 fan blades into 4 pairs and joined those pairs at the outer edge to enclose the space in between them to help generate static pressure. At their maximum fan speed of 2,500 RPM, they generate a whopping 4.29mm H2O static pressure and 77.4 CFM of airflow. But all that pushing power doesn't come free, and the cost is noise, coming in at 39.9 decibels. To try and lessen some of that noise, the fans come with rubber pads on the corners to dampen vibrations, as is tradition on premium fans nowadays. Next we move on to the core of the cooler itself, with a 27mm thick 360 radiator made from aluminium, and what MSI claim is evaporation proof tubing. The tubes are made from 3 layers of netted plastic and also have a reinforced mesh exterior, or sleeving to you and I. Then we get to the brains of the operation, and wow, does this have a big old brain. This pump block is ginormous! It measures 95 by 94 by 83mm, which is as big as some entire air coolers. But housed in this giant shroud is a 3-pronged attack on the cooling hierarchy, intended to launch MSI and the K360 straight to the top. At the bottom of the stack is an Acertech 7th Gen pump block with the pump impeller and Coldplate improvements that brings. However, as that same pump block is used in a number of other coolers, it's going to be down to the fans and other features to differentiate it in performance. On top of the pump block is a 60mm Torx fan 3.0. which is included to aid VRM cooling on the motherboard, and we'll look into how much that helps later. To top it all off, the MSI MPG CORELIQUID K360 has a 2.4-inch LCD screen which is able to display a variety of system information, such as core temperature and frequency, as well as custom graphics. So that just leaves us with an RGB cable splitter and the mounting material, with the K360 being compatible with a wide range of both Intel and AMD sockets. It amazes me that Acertech are still using the same mounting mechanisms that they have done for the 13-14 years that they've been making these coolers. The backplate and notch retention ring have hardly changed at all in all that time. In fact, I have an Antec Cooler 620 here from 2011, and that will fit the retention ring of the 2021 MSI K360. But as the saying goes, if it ain't broke, you're not trying hard enough. What do you mean that's not the saying? Now, with all these gadgets and gizmos, we're going to need a way to control everything, and that's where the software MSI Center comes into play. Presently, MSI Center only works on Z590 motherboards. As we have an AMD platform, we have to install MSI Dragon Center and then this MSI CORELIQUID software, which is essentially the same thing, just with a slightly different look to it. So this first tab is to control the LCD display. The first option is hardware monitor, where you can set up to 3 parameters to display on the LCD. On the left is a preview of what will be shown on the screen, and you can select from CPU frequency and temperature, GPU memory frequency and usage, and then fan speeds, the pump speed, the radiator fans, and the water block fan, which is the VRM one found on the water block. The fourth option, GI Smart Fan, or Smart Fan as it says there greyed out, is for a particular fan frequency they have, and we'll come back to that a little later. I'm not sure why they went with memory frequency and usage. I would have preferred core temperature and frequency, maybe FPS if they can get that in there, but it's a little strange. Second is where you can display an image, and there are several stock ones that you can choose from, and you can also upload your own. They have to be in 320 by 420 pixels and in bitmap format. Here I have the BitTech logo and Making Computers logo. It does take quite a while for them to actually get applied and appear on the water block itself though. The same thing happens with fan profiles as well. It just takes an absolute age for them to be loaded into the cooler and to be initiated. Sometimes you even have to reboot the system before it will implement a change. Now this next section is to put a customized banner on where you can have some text scrolling across the screen. It has several backgrounds for you to use initially, and again you can upload your own pictures. Now it has a limit of 62 letters and it doesn't allow any kind of punctuation marks. It says English only, but I'm presuming that that refers to English characters. Doesn't seem to mind if you input a little German. The last option here is a system clock, and they have 3 different styles. In the top right corner you can also adjust the brightness of the LCD screen and the direction that you've placed the CPU block so it knows how to display the images that you've selected. The next tab is where you'll find all the fan settings, and there are 4 pre-programmed fan profiles to choose from: balance, silent mode, game mode and GI mode. GI standing for Gaming Intelligence, and it's the only of the 4 fan profiles to set a different fan curve for each of the 3 fans, and also the only one to have a fan stop mode. I would have thought that would have also been useful for silent mode, but they've chose to only employ it in this GI mode. Now with GI mode selected, if we go back to LCD display and hardware monitor, we can now select the GI Smart Fan option, and this will display the individual fan speed for the 3 fans. The 5th option being a custom fan profile that you can set yourself, and you can separate the 3 fans and have different fan profiles for them all, but it won't let you apply a fan stop mode, and it also increases the minimum pump speed to 60% instead of 50%. I'm not entirely sure why they do that. It might be to protect the user from accidentally setting profiles that are far too low and might cause damage to components, but it's a bit of a shame that they don't enable the fan stop mode. And lastly we get to the ARGB. Now despite being ARGB, you can't actually address each individual LED yourself. You can only select from one of the 8 or 9 different profiles. And because you use an RGB cable splitter, you also can't set individual profiles for each fan. Whatever you select has to be the same on each fan, which is also a bit of a shame. Another oddity of the software is I can only select the colour on the static option. So say if I want to have it on Meteor, if I want to see what the different colours look like, I have to go onto static, change the colour and then go back to Meteor. I don't see why there can't be a colour palette with the rest of the options. That's just a bit of an annoying niggle there. The RGB effects are a bit basic and ancient for such a premium modern all-in-one cooler as well. So with all that out of the way, let's get down to the benchmarks. To recap how we test on our 5800X, I use 3 different CPU wattage profiles with 3 different fan profiles to make a 20-minute run on Cinebench. I repeat these tests 3 times, with the cooler being cleaned, repasted and reseated in between each set of tests. We get our temperature results by using just the last 10 minutes of each Cinebench run, and we get the average CPU delta against the ambient temperature of the room across the 3 runs. We record the ambient throughout the test so we can get the delta at the time each CPU reading was taken, rather than using an average or just a single reading at the beginning or end of the test. First up, we'll look at the 100% fan speed test and see the maximum cooling potential that each cooler has to offer. So at 100 watts, the MSI K360 managed 42.5 degrees C delta, which is 0.7 C less than the Pure Loop 360 at 43.2 and 1.5 C less than the Corsair Custom Loop at 44 dead. At 125 watts, the CORELIQUID K360 managed a delta of 55.4 C, 1.2 degrees C cooler than the Pure Loop 360 at 56.6, and 2 degrees cooler than the Corsair Custom Loop at 57.4. At 150 watts, the K360 did 66.9 C over ambient, the Pure Loop 360 did 68 degrees C, and the Corsair Custom Loop 68.4. So the K360 leads them by 1.1 degrees and 1.5 degrees respectively. No real surprises there. The cooler with the fastest, most powerful fans comes out on top, but at least we can see there's nothing unusual going on. Up next we have our real world test, where coolers are tested on a standardised fan curve that should be more representative of how they'd be used out in the wild. Now, I did say that if a cooler has any fan curves of their own, I would include this in the chart, but seeing as the K360 comes with 4, we'll look at that separately after these main results. So at 100 watts, the K360 got 46.4 degrees C over ambient, the Pure Loop 48.1, an increase of 1.7 C, and the Corsair Custom Loop 49.3, an increase of 2.9 C. At 125 watts, the CORELIQUID got 57 degrees C above ambient, the Pure Loop 58.8 C above ambient, which is an increase of 1.8 C, and the Corsair Custom Loop 60.3, an increase of 3.3 degrees. Then at 150 watts, the CORELIQUID got 66.9 C over ambient, the Pure Loop got 68.6, an increase of 1.7, and the Corsair Custom 69.6, an increase of 2.7 degrees C. With this being a percentage-based fan curve, it's no real surprise that the K360 comes out on top with its faster fans. However, in this test and the 100% fan speed test, it's interesting to note that it increases its lead from the 100 to 125 watt load, but then jumping up to 150 watts, it's reeled back in by the other coolers, so we'll have to see if that continues. So to the included fan profiles, run at 125 watts, and against my fan curve, which managed 57 degrees C over ambient, we have the silent at 56.4, GI mode at 54.6, balanced at 53.9, and game mode at 52.9 C over ambient. So the 4 included fan profiles go up in aggressiveness from silent to GI mode to balance mode to game, and that comes with an increase in volume. Unfortunately, I can't give you any average fan speeds for those 4 profiles, as when they're connected to the K360, there's no way of recording that through the MSI software. It does come with a fan cable that plugs into the CPU fan header on the motherboard, but that gives you the RPM for the VRM fan and not the fans on the radiator, which is a little annoying. Speaking of that VRM fan, MSI makes some pretty strong claims promising to knock 27 degrees C off your VRM temps according to their website. So let's have a look and see if it really helps, and if it does, how much. Using the 150 watt fan curve to get the results, and using historic data, we can see that the VRM fan does in fact make a difference. Even at its lowest setting of 20%, the K360 posts the lowest VRM temperature delta, an advantaged increased at 60%, with the only real gain in increasing it past 60% a whole heap of noise. Being quite a high pitch, it's even more noticeable too. While we didn't see the 20 degrees C decrease as shown on MSI's website, with the biggest difference being 9 degrees centigrade, this is with tests being run in a very open case with all the panels removed and the rear fans blowing over the VRM anyway, so we didn't see any temperatures above 50 degrees C anyway. And so to our last set of results, where we run the coolers at a fixed fan speed so that they all run at 35 decibels. For the K360, this meant running the pump and VRM fan at their minimum levels, and then the radiator fans at an average of 1287 RPM. So at 100 watts, we have the K360 at 45.1 degrees C over ambient, the Pure Loop at 44.9 degrees C above ambient, and the Corsair Custom Loop 54.8. So the K360 is 0.2 C above the Pure Loop 360 and 0.7 C below the Corsair Custom Loop. With such a small difference between the coolers and it essentially being about the same as the run-to-run variants, we can say that the coolers are pretty much the same. So at 125 watts we have 58.2 C over ambient for the K360, at 0.5C above that is the Pure Loop 360 with 58.7, and then the Corsair custom loop lagging behind a little bit at 59.7, 1.5C above the K360. Then at 150 watts we... this is awkward. Yes indeed, the K360 failed the 150 watt 35 decibel test. Now there is a very valid reason for this, so before you go marching off to the comments to complain this is a fix and a scam, just hear me out. Hey, I told you to wait. Stop that, what are you writing? Hey big boy, if you want to see more of my... But... I spent an extortionate amount of time testing this cooler. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong. Maybe the overclock profile that I was using had gone bad or corrupted. I had it backed up on a memory card, so I used that backup and it still wouldn't get through. The other tests were going through fine. The 150 watt curve test was fine, although the fans were getting pretty close to maximum. Obviously the maximum one went through. I repasted and reseated this cooler half a dozen times. The pattern in the TIM on the cooler and the CPU wasn't fantastic, but it looked like it should be fine, and it was completing all the other tests, so I just didn't understand what was going wrong. I even stuck the Pure Loop 360 back on just for a sanity check to make sure that still worked, and it smashed through 3 20-minute runs without breaking a sweat, like it was nothing. So it must be this cooler. I thought, well, let's have a look and see if there are any other reviews out that might be reporting the same issues. Other reviews I found reported no such things. But I did notice that they were all using Intel desktop processors. And then something clicked.
Oh, great Scott!
The pattern in the TIM on the IHS and Coldplate. The fact that the MSI Center software is only currently available on Z590 motherboards. It's the Coldplate. Now it's only been in the last couple of years that AMD have caught up to and overtaken Intel processors. For the decade prior to that, Intel absolutely dominated the desktop market. And it was also in that decade that all-in-one coolers such as those made and pioneered by Acertec have increased in popularity. Because of Intel's huge dominance, Acertec have catered their Coldplate to Intel desktop processors. Now, Intel desktop processors have a concave IHS, so it dips in the middle. So Acertec coolers have a convex cold plate, so it bows outwards. Now, while the Intel desktop processor has a concave IHS, the Ryzen 5000 CPUs have a convex IHS. I found a brilliant article on Igor's Labs website where they've run some processors through a 3D scanner, which is able to accurately measure and map out the IHS. From these pictures you can see a clear dip in the centre of the Intel IHS, right over the silicon itself, where the Ryzen 5000 IHS has more of a rectangular convex dome over the centre, with images showing where that sits in relation to the chiplet dies. The cores themselves are sitting to the left in these pictures, which when the CPU is inserted in the motherboard would be the bottom edge. This is one of the areas where we're seeing a build up in paste, and that would correlate to the failure to sufficiently cool the cores in the admittedly extreme 150 watt 35 decibel test. Now, I don't have a 3D scanner or thousands of pounds worth of flatness and pressure testing equipment, so I've had to go old school and low tech, but we can clearly demonstrate a curvature to the cold plate of the cooler using this engineer's square. These have precision machined flat surfaces for measuring and marking right angles, and you can clearly see here that there's a significant convex curvature to the cold plate of MSI's MPG CORELIQUID K360. The Pure Loop 360 does have some curvature, but the centre of the cold plate appears to have a much flatter and wider plateau, with it only arching back from around the screws. Now, you also have to take this failure with a grain of salt, as it really is at the extreme end of testing. With coolers these days being so similar in performance, you really have to push them hard to get any sort of difference in performance from them. The 125 watt profile is a 4.7 GHz all-core overclock, and that's a pretty decent overclock on these processors while matching the power consumption of the CPU set at stock settings. For 150 watts, I have to up the voltages on that 4.7 GHz all-core overclock quite a bit, and it's not something that I would recommend doing. When running Cinebench, it even lowers the scores from the 125 watt profile. With the CPU set to the optimized default settings on this X570 Aorus Pro motherboard, the cooler is capable of cooling the CPU even on the silent profile. After an hour of running the Heaven benchmark with an average FPS of 220, the highest temperature seen on the CPU was 71 degrees centigrade, and that's actual temperature, not a delta. It also passed a 20-minute Cinebench run, with the delta being 60.3. So leaving performance to the side for a minute, I found mounting the cooler fairly easy and straightforward. On this particular CPU, I got the best results using quite a lot of thermal paste and tightening the lower two nuts first, hoping to get the lower half of the Coldplate and IHS in better contact, as that's where the cores are located. However, it was a little awkward with the amount of cables coming out of the pump block. You have a SATA power cable, a USB cable, 3 4-pin fan connectors, an RGB cable, and a fan cable to connect to the CPU fan header on the motherboard, which only has the ground and RPM signal wires on it for the VRM fan. That's 7 cables. I know there's a lot to control on this cooler, but that's an awful lot of mess to emanate from the CPU block. A better solution might have been to have just a power and data cable going to the pump block, and then a separate control unit in the rear to handle the rest of it. That would at least make the front neater. Another alternative would have been to run the fan cables and the RGB cable up through the sleeving in the tubing. I've seen that done on other coolers, and it's a really neat and tidy solution. The fan cable you connect to the CPU header on the motherboard gives you the RPM of the VRM fan and not the radiator fans, which I find an odd choice. And I don't understand the decision to have a single RGB cable and 3 separate fan cables. I would have had separate RGB cables so you could have more interesting light effects on the fans, as the ones it comes with are pretty boring, to be honest. If you really wanted to control the fans individually, most motherboards will come with enough fan headers for you to be able to do that through the motherboard, but pretty much all motherboards only have 2 of the 3-pin RGB headers, and that's not enough to connect all the fans individually, so I think that's a bit of a backwards decision, especially when you consider that only the GI mode of the fan profiles controls the fan speeds individually, and it seems a bit of a gimmick that they've put in rather than being genuinely performance driven. In general then, the performance of the MSI MPG CORELIQUID K360 is good. There's not a lot they can do about Acertec's decision to favour Intel CPUs, and it is able to cool this 5800X at stock settings with its quietest, most conservative fan profile. It has strong visual presence from its RGB fans and the customizable LCD screen, but the resolution you can upload pictures in, which is 320 by 240, is pretty low, and it's so annoying that the window in the cover has a blue tint to it. It should be clear to allow whatever graphics you want on it to really shine through and not be muted by some murky hue. Another annoying thing about the LCD screen is it has a habit of crashing when you're uploading a new picture. It can take 10 to 15 seconds for it to be uploaded, and then sometimes you're just met with a black screen, and it doesn't matter how long you wait, it's not going away. You can try changing it to the clock or some of the system metric screens, but it just will not change. Sometimes you can get it to come back with a shutdown and reboot, but a lot of the time I've had to uninstall the software and then reinstall it and get it back to scratch to be able to upload a different picture. Then we get to the price. £240 or $280, which is an astonishing amount of money for an all-in-one. That's twice the price of the Pure Loop 360. Obviously, whether you would buy this cooler would depend on how much you value its features and how much they align with your wants and needs from a cooler. This is a cooler which almost had it right, but a few poor or even strange decisions leave it wanting. and at this price bracket I don't think those are mistakes that you can afford to make. Make sure you stay tuned, as up next I have the Be Quiet Silent Loop 2 to review. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that and any future reviews from myself or Mel, and also the amazing mods of Alex Banks. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, builds.gg and Twitter for all the latest news and reviews, links to which are down below. Down there you'll also find a link to our merchandise store where you can pick up some cool BitTech apparel, as well as our Discord server where you'll find a friendly bunch of folk talking about tech, builds, mods and the deeper meaning of morning coffee. So that's it from me and the MSI MPG CORELIQUID K360. So until the next one, take care, stay safe and maybe check your Coldplate before you check yourself. See you then.
I am not amused.